Alright everybody, it's your pal Revolver84 here, and today we're continuing our ASO guide with ASO guide on how to do tanking. So in this we're going to cover everything from what a tank is, what stats you need to look for, what skills are appropriate, and what tactics you should be using as a tank in ASO. So what's a tank then? So the common misconception is that a tank is basically someone that stands in the middle of the room and just takes all the damage while everyone else runs them, having a bit of fun and actually playing the game. Couldn't be further from the truth. A tank is more than just a punching bag designed just to stand there and take damage. There's so much more to it. In addition to that, there's also a main and an off tank, and the difference is most apparent when it comes to doing trials, so it's very important you know what you're doing and you agree that before you begin your run. So the main responsibility of a tank, before I break it down into the two different types, is to take damage. Yeah, it is to take damage and to alleviate the pressure from the DPSs and the healer, who can actually do the damage to the enemies and to heal each other. So there is that to it, but there's more to it as well. So as a tank as well, you've got to position yourself appropriately, and you've got to position the enemies appropriately, and by that I mean sometimes you've got to draw enemies away from where the main fight is to alleviate a bit of damage on the other guys. So it's not just a case of standing there and getting hit, it's a case of moving certain enemies away from your team so that they focus predominantly just on yourself, and any AoE attacks that they do are focused just on you, and you're not getting caught up with collateral damage by hitting your teammates when they're trying to damage just you. Also as well, getting the enemy to look at you in the right way. So by that what I mean is, if you can maneuver your enemy so that they are looking at you but with their backs to the rest of your team, your DPSs and such like, they're far less likely to take any sort of damage, and the enemy is supposed to be most likely to be focused on you with all their hits and stuff. So that's really important as well. Now the difference between the primary or main tank and an off tank is that your primary or your main tank is predominantly focused on dealing with the big bad boss in the room. You know the one it is. It's usually the biggest guy in the room, or the guy with the biggest health bar, or the guy who has the most complicated mechanics. That's the boss. That's the guy that the primary main tank needs to focus on. The objective of that is your traditional tank activity, which is to do what I've just said, which is to move the guys, the main boss, away from the rest of your team, get him to focus all his efforts just on you and absorb his damage, while the rest of the adds are dealt with by your team until your team's in a position to come and attack the boss that you're now dealing with. Your secondary or off tank isn't so much interested in getting the attention of the main tank, because the main boss, because obviously the main boss is being dealt with by your main tank. Your off tank's job is to deal with the adds. So especially in certain trials like Hell Ra, Citadel and such like, it can be very easily done where your team are off fighting, your group is off fighting and such like, and although the main boss in the area is getting dealt with really well by the tank, your DPSs and your healers can still get completely overwhelmed by adds. That's because of the sheer volume of them. Now this is where your off tank comes in. So your off tank is responsible for basically giving them the runaround. Your DPSs are doing what they do, your healers doing what they do, but the off tank is getting the attention of as many adds as possible and pulling them away from the combat. If anything, it's take them on a wild goose chase out into the middle of nowhere. If the off tank can get 5 or more serious hitting enemy taunted and attacking them, they can take them off into a corner of the room and they can just absorb the damage that all these adds are taking. So what you end up having is essentially 3 battles in one place. You have your main tank dealing with just the boss in one area, away from all the combat. You have your off tank dealing with a good portion of the adds in another area, absorbing all their damage. And the main combat should be happening with your DPS and your healer in the main area of the room, or the floor, or whatever you want to call it, where the battlefield's taking place. And what should be happening is your DPS is up, smashing through what's left of the adds. They are then turning the attention to the adds getting dealt with by the off tank. They should be able to clear that. Once the adds are all gone, the entire group is in a position to now deal with the boss, and the DPS can just rack up based on that, because everyone's now focused on just bringing the boss down. If you can do that in that order, generally speaking, dungeons and trials are fine to complete in that sort of format. There are the odd ones, don't get us wrong, where that mechanic doesn't quite work and you've got to think about it a little bit more. So like, for example, Vollenfell, the very battle of that, the 3 automatons, they're all just of equal strength and stuff, in terms of health bar and stuff, so you've got to be a bit more sensible as to understand which ones you want to take out first. Often it is a case of dealing with whatever boss type character is the healer, so it goes back down to your normal approach of how you deal with things, which is your healer, then your DPS, and then your boss. So what stats should a good tank be interested in? Because obviously you can't deal with all of them, so let's go to character and we'll pop up and there's your attributes screen there. So although there's a lot of attributes there, a tank isn't interested in a lot of them. The only ones a tank should be interested in, a good tank, should be interested in maximum health, health recovery, spell resistance, and physical resistance, and to a degree crit resistance, but the crit resistance you tend to find that's more sort of PvP-ish, and you shouldn't really be using tank builds predominantly for PvP-ish type of things, because you tend to find that certainly bosses tend not to do too much critical damage except when it's like their ultimate versions of their attacks. So the reason why you still need a relatively good amount of magicka recovery or stamina recovery is depending on your build. So you could be a stamina based build, or you could be a magicka based build, or you could be a hybrid build like myself. And the reason you still want a relatively good amount of them statistics is because that you are going to be using your buffs to generate shields, to mitigate some of the damage coming to yourself, and also to buff yourself in terms of getting health back, but we'll deal with that when we come to showing you the skill sets. So let's break down in more detail the main ones and why you need them for. So maximum health, well, this is as obvious as the nose on your face. Maximum health is needed because you need to take the most amount of damage, and the only way you're going to be able to take the most amount of damage is if you can handle taking hits and against your health. So I can't count the amount of times where I have been fighting in a dungeon or a trial, predominantly dungeons if in truth like, and the rest of the group's been completely wiped out with just myself left. The only reason that's occurred is because my health is so high, and I've clutched it by reviving all my group to return back to the combat to finish off the fight. I cannot count how many times that's happened, and that's purely because my maximum health is so high that you tend to find that even the ultimates used by the bosses aren't enough to reduce all my health, and that's once it goes through all the physical resistance and spell resistance that we're going to come to in a second. So maximum health, essential, as high as you can get it, up there in the gods. Anything above 36, 37,000, you're in the right area. Anything below that, work on it, look at your gear. Health recovery, same thing. So it's all well and good having absolutely high maximum health, but you want your health recovery to be extremely high as well, because if you take a damage and you haven't got a good health recovery back, that's all well and good being able to take that one bad hit, but the next time the boss comes around to do his ultimate again, if you're not fully recovered, you're just going to get wiped out. So your health recovery just needs to be as high as possible as well. Ideally you're looking at 950 plus. So your resistances, so spell resistance and physical resistance are straightforward. They are to resist the damage incoming from those types of attacks. So really, unless you're going to be very, very bespoke and proper build your character to doing individual dungeons, my advice would be just to have them as high as possible across both levels. If, for example, you were dealing with certain dungeons which dealt with predominantly spell-based enemies, you might want to be able to reduce your physical resistance for the sake of putting up spell resistance, but that's really bespoke character building, and I'll tip my hat to anyone that does it, because you've clearly got a lot more time on your hands than I have to do that. So for me, it is just getting those two stats as high as possible. Critical resistance, I said it earlier, predominantly sort of for PvP. You tend not to find that the PvE elements have a lot of crit. Not so much that you have to worry about it any much more than you would do for any other sort of PvE sort of a combat, but certainly in boss battles and stuff you tend to find those crit actions only ever really happen for ultimates and such like, so don't worry about that too much. It just needs to be a relatively good amount. What you lose are your spell damage, your weapon damage, your spell crit and your weapon crit. Reason 4, you're not there to do damage. You're not there to do damage at all, really. Don't get us wrong and have the odd swipe, certainly if it means that you're going to start regenerating some of your resources by having the odd swipe, but predominantly you're not there to do damage, and you've got to get that drilled into your head. You're there to just take attention, create aggro and get attention of the mobs, or get attention of the boss. Because of that, your weapon damage hasn't got to be amazing, your spell damage hasn't got to be amazing, you know. It's always going to be something, unless you go out there completely unarmed. What's the sense in that? And unfortunately, you can't have 2 shields in your hand. Right.
But the earth is hungry, yes it is.
So the next thing we're going to look at is skills. So what skills should you be using as a tank? So let's go on our skills here. Skills. Now obviously you've got a primary and secondary bar. Now first tip straight out the bat, and I'm not going to lie, it took me a while to realise this. Use sword and shield for both back and front bars. I'll call it a mistake. I made the mistake of going into dungeons with my back bar as a staff. The reason being is I was like, well, I'm a high elf. If I got to a point where my damage was getting so bad I need to recover, I could step back and do some damage with my staff while my resources recovered. That was completely the wrong approach. If I was having to stand off to give me resources, I was clearly doing something wrong, and it took me a while to realise that. So both bars straight away should be sword and board. Now some of the abilities I've got here to look at is I tend to have a predominantly sort of main function action on my first bar and a recoverable actions on my second bar. So what I mean by that is actions that I am going to be predominantly doing to aggro and keep the attention of the enemy, and then my secondary bar is an auxiliary bar to sort of do my buffs. So I'll go through them from right to left. So first of all, my ultimate on my primary bar is my magma shell. So that ignites the lava in your veins, limiting incoming damage to 3% of your max health. It also does a nice damage shield for your allies as well. So that's really good for doing like trials and for doing dungeons as well. Very useful thing. Buys a bit of time. Ultimate's quite cheap as well, 200. So I'll keep that. I tend to keep that on my front bar. Heroic slash. I tend to spam this a lot, because what this does is, although I'm not doing a lot of damage, 3,140 damage is not going to do a lot, and I'm not too much bothered about reducing movement speed either. I'm spamming this because the more I do this, the more heroism I get, the more minor heroism I get, granting one ultimate every 1.5 seconds for 9 seconds. So I spam that, I hit that, as soon as 9 seconds down I hit that. That's never not up when I'm doing dungeons or trials. Reason being, it means I can pop me magma shell. The next one, now this is your bread and butter. This is what every single tank should be running. If you're not running this, then you're not a tank. It's straightforward that. This is your taunt. So what you do is, although it does physical damage, 2,870, you're taunting the enemy to attack you for 15 seconds. A good tank should be using this, banging this into your main boss if you're the primary, or banging this into as many adds if you're the off tank as possible, and drawing them to you by creating aggro and making them approach you. This is the only way you're going to be able to get the enemy's attention realistically in a situation where there's so many people around and you need to focus your effort on maybe just one particular person. So that's my close range taunt. My distance taunt is Inner Fire. This comes from the Undaunted tree, and this is another taunt. Again, the damage is absolutely minimal to nothing. You might as well not be there. It does create a synergy, which is again something, I suppose. It's nothing really particularly amazing, but it ignites the fires of hate an enemy, forcing them to attack you for 15 seconds. Now this is my taunt for distance. So this is when I need to grab people and make them come to me. It also is excellent, absolutely excellent to use if you're an off tank. Reason being is you can literally stand in the middle of the room, look from left to right, bang, 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 bang with your Inner Fire, get the attention of 8 people without even having to run up to them. They'll all start approaching you, and you can start walking backwards towards the back of the room, making them all approach you while the fight continues somewhere else. That is an excellent one for an off tank. Another one to use is, if you're an off tank, is Fiery Grip. So this is where you use change to bring them to you, but that can be quite expensive and it can run out after a while, so you might not get the 5-6 people that I'm talking about. You might only get a handful, but that's another one to bring them to you. The thing is to remember with Fiery Grip is that is not a taunt. You will pull them to you, but you will still have to use Ransack to get them to attack you and aggro them. Next one is Absorb Magic. Now I've only just unlocked this to be, in truth. It took, although I've had it for a long time, the previous one, I haven't morphed it for absolutely ages. I've just had other things on. But this is basically to increase your maximum health by 12, and also while you have a shield equipped and this ability slotted, the amount of damage you can block is increased by 8%. Bolster your defense, absorbing 20,636 damage from the next spell projectile cast at you. Now that is absolutely excellent for things like the final boss Kinroth, I think it is, on Imperial City dungeons, Imperial City prison, things like that. That it would be an excellent damage mitigation buff. So that is very much on my front box. That's what my time is going to be spent using most of the time in combat. Now if you've watched me on a lot of my videos, you'll know that I absolutely love hardened armor. Very rarely is this ever off my front bar. It's just an excellent spell mitigation buff. A really big fan of it. The only time I don't run it is if I'm purely going for PvP, DPS based sort of damage in like a sort of a battleground sort of Cyrodiil sort of environment, or if I'm very much just wanting to whiz through as many PvE enemies as absolutely possible in such a short period of time, I'll not have that on. But almost all the time other than that, I've always got hardened armor in my square bar, on my square button of my first bar. So on my second bar, going right to left, we have Shieldwall. Now although Shieldwall is available, I tend not to use it too much because I tend to run Warhorn, which is more of a synergy for all your team. So Warhorn boosts the stats for like your health and stuff for all your team, so it's a very good thing to have. But Warhorn's more for sort of like an off-tanky type of role. Shield Wall is your oh shit button. Shield Wall is when you're the main tank, you're facing the big bad boss and you're in trouble. You're low on resource, your health's about to disappear entirely, you're in trouble. It only costs 100 ultimate. Now if you're spamming Heroic Slash as often as you should be, you should be able to get 100 ultimate knee bother. So as soon as you get a bit of problems and you think to yourself, oh, I'm in trouble, this is your oh shit button, press that and it buys you 5 seconds for your resources to come back. This is why your health recovery should be so high for, because 5 seconds your health will bomb back up and you'll be in a more safe position. This is where I learned the hard way, by thinking that if I was in that position where my resources were low and my health was low, I made the mistake of thinking that's when I had to stand off. You should never be standing off as a tank. If you're standing off, that means you're doing something wrong, and that means that the main guy is going to be attacking your group who are not prepared for him at this point. You should never be standing off, and this oh shit button Shield Wall allows you to do that. So the next one, like I said, these are all going to be buffs. So the next one's unstoppable. So any good tank should really be running heavy armor. They should be absolutely rammed full of heavy armor. Reason being is that mitigates the most damage. And Unstoppable 4 is the maximum one you can get for heavy armor, which intensifies your physical resistance and creates major resolve and major ward, increasing your physical and spell resistance by 5,280 for 15 seconds. Bloody expensive, mate. bloody expensive. 4,860 stamina. It's not cheap, but it's very good. So draw essence. I tend to put a few things in here. It's not necessarily always draw essence, I'm not going to lie, but in this particular instance I'm going to put it down. So draw essence, this does technically cause damage, but I'm more sort of using this for the heal. So it does generate 101% heal for you for the damage caused. You're not going to do a lot of heal, so really this is when you're basically popping this when you've got a load of resource and you're just winding up your enemy and you're trying to slash them and do a bit of damage. Green Dragon's Blood, quite expensive, 4,320, but draw on your Draconic Blood to heal for 33% of your missing health. Now that is a lot. What you do there is you basically wait until you're in trouble and then you bang that, and before you know it you're in a healthier position where you can take more damage and you feel more comfortable. You gain major fortitude, major endurance, minor vitality, increasing your health recovery and stamina recovery by 20% and healing received by 8% for 23 seconds. Excellent, go to, bang that, brilliant skill as a tank, absolutely. Another excellent one, which also helps your team, is Resolve and Vigor. Renew your forces resolve, healing yourself for 5,130 health over 5 seconds, and nearby allies for 3,954 health for 5 seconds. Resolve and Vigor is another one, but it's a little bit cheaper in stamina than Green Dragon's Blood, and you should be popping that just as good practice anyway to help your team. A good tank should be away from the main fighting anyway, but if you're an off tank and you're still quite close to the combat with your DPS guys, your healer guys, that's a good one to pop. You try and just support your team just a little bit, but don't forget you're still getting 5,130 health or whatever that will be. You're still getting a health buff by banging that. Igneous Shield. So again, this is an excellent one for a tank for a buff. It creates a defensive damage shield for you and nearby allies that absorbs damage. Your own damage shield absorbs 200% additional damage. So this not only supports your rest of your team, the rest of your group in damage mitigation, you get a 200% additional damage bonus. I'll say that again, 200%. That is absolutely fantastic. Does it mean damage gets through? Yes, it does. But if your physical resistance and spell resistance is as high as it should be, in the mid-30s, the damage that you're going to get's almost nothing. The area as well is really wide. It's like 12 meters, so you're almost certain to get at least some of your team in that catchment area as well for buffs for them. You also gain major mend and increasing your health done by 25%. I mean, alright, it's only for 3 seconds, and the chances that, for example, a healer's going to catch you in those 3 seconds to heal you is pretty slim, unless you're a very coordinated group. But that still works if you take a potion. If you take a pot, that still works, and you get that 25% additional boost. So there's just some examples of some of the stats that a healer should be, a tank should be running. There are other ones. You know, I've touched across some of them, like Fiery Grip and Warhorns and such like that. There are other ones there, but they're the skills that I use predominantly when I know I'm going to be in for a scrap as a tank. So what traits should a tank be running? So I'm not going to lie, the traits are pretty universal for what you should be using. You get your good traits and your bad traits. As you can see, mine are predominantly going to be things like Reinforced, Impenetrable, Infused, Divines, over and over and over again. They're the traits that you want to be using, but to be fair, that's nothing unusual. Like those traits there are predominantly what you're going to be using for most builds. Certainly Divines. Sturdy, I guess, is one that maybe is not used as a tank, probably for sort of like DPS and such like. But certainly your Divines are a trait that you should be using. So just to go through while I'm on the screen, what I sort of have. I'm currently running predominantly the Mark of the Pariah set gained from the Orsinium DLC. You get them from dungeons and world bosses and things. That's predominantly what I'm running here. So I've got a five piece of that. I've also got the Endurance set from IC. 3 piece of that I'm running. Now I've got like Histbark, but I haven't got any other items. I mean, I've got items. I own a load of Histbark. I think I've got every single piece, but I haven't got them on this build yet. Not recognising the set. Anyway, Helm of Fire, that's more sort of do with just what that is. That can be changed. I've got things like Black Rose in gold and stuff and that, but just to give you sort of an overview of what I'm using there. Mighty Chowden Paladin, that's not necessarily susceptible really. A better one would be Bloodspawn. It's just because it's got the impenetrable one on for myself, but something like Bloodspawn would be more appropriate, or Tremor Scale, definitely more appropriate. That's just something I've got to improve and get the legendary before I start using that. Sithis, I run a couple of Sithis, so I've got Sithis feet and rings, just for the health add, but you can tend to get that sort of bonus from a lot of different sets, so that's what I tend to run. I've got a couple of builds on my channel, check them out for various different things, but that's currently what I'm running at the minute, just to give you an idea what my stats look like once again. Well, that was a guide to tanking on ASO. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you've learned something. I've tried to be as open as I can and honest as I can with you. I've told you a couple of home truths, some things I've gotten right, some things I've gotten wrong. Some things I've learned over a period of time, but this is ultimately what I've managed to get to. Again, thanks very much for watching. If you have any more notes, any more tips, please add them in the comments below. I'll certainly like to learn them some more myself. I'm always learning. Don't forget to subscribe. All the best. Ta-da.